Sarah was talking about superheroes with our kids, I was thinking about a book that I've been reading, and it's not quite a superhero story, but there's some connection there. And I was going to share it with the United Methodist Women at the most recent women's luncheon. We shared favorite books. And so I had to step out before I had a chance to share, but now I get to share with all of you what one of my favorite books is. It's actually a series that I just came across, and it is a science fiction fantasy series. It's called Zodiac, and it's set out in space, so it combines some of my favorite things, space and fantasy, in one great story. Now, if this isn't your cup of tea, you're probably not going to love it, but I loved it and thought it was a lot of fun. But I was thinking about this book and connecting it with our All Saints Sunday, because in this book, it is set so that every different constellation is imagined as if it's its own house, its own world. And in each world, it's marked by a different characteristic, a different gift. And so there is the Cancer world. That is the world, as in the zodiac Cancer. That constellation is imagined as a water world, and they're marked by nurture. And the Sagittarians, they're marked by curiosity, and Pisces is an ice world that values spirituality above all else. And so in the book, there are these characters. You're born into the world, and you're marked by it, and you grow into that characteristic. But there's also these characters, and they're called risers. They're called risers, and in time, it is revealed that they don't quite fit the world where they were born. In time, they begin to shift or change, or it comes about that maybe they belong to another world. They have a variety of traits and characteristics, not just the one main trait of their own home world. And so in time, they begin to shift. They don't quite fit the mold of the world around them. As you can imagine, in the book, and just as in our own world, to not quite fit in proves problematic for these characters. But in time, it is revealed that all along there has been another house, another world that is hidden by dark matter. It was unknown, it was hidden, it was not seen. But when the dark matter clears and this world comes into view, it turns out that the risers belonged to this other world all along, a world marked by unity that meant to heal the divisions that had occurred in this galaxy. And I was thinking about this connection of the risers, the ones who didn't quite conform to the world around them, but knew they were part of another world somewhere. And I couldn't help thinking of the saints in our lives. I couldn't help but think of the ones, as in the disciples that Jesus was talking to and calling to them to take up your cross and keep your mind on the divine thoughts, not just on human thoughts. What is there to gain if you gain even the whole world around you, but lose your own soul, your own life of who you are called to be? In other places, the connection in Scripture is even clearer. It says the disciples are taught, do not be conformed to this world, but to the world above. I read it and my mind thinks of the saints. My mind thinks of the risers in this story, not conformed to the world around them, but knowing that they belong to another world, even if it is at times unseen. The people who obeyed and lived into their truest calling, even when it didn't quite match the world around them. Even when it meant believing in a home hidden behind dark matter that some might wonder if it was even there. I can't help but think it's rather fitting and wonderfully fitting that they're given the title of risers. Risers belong to a world whose primary attribute is, as I said, unity and healing the divisions around them. They rise out of the worlds that they are born into and into a hope for what those worlds can be together. I love that they're called risers, and I think that we, as disciples, are called to be risers in our own day and in our own age, risers in our own world. That same instruction that Berta rightly pointed out when Jesus talks to the disciples, it's good for all of us to listen. For that same instruction to remember that we belong ultimately to a kingdom beyond this one. A kingdom that is admittedly at times hard to see, hidden behind dark matter of fear and hatred and violence, of division, of despair or apathy, a world that is at times hidden by those things. A world, this world, that sometimes seems to hide over God's kingdom with dark matter, taking the light out of God's kingdom. And yet that is the world we belong to. That is our true home, where we are from, where we are called to belong, where we are called to return, and where we are called to live, even as we live here. Because we are reminded that our identities, they are greater than the ones that this world would ascribe to us. No matter what those are, how great or small they are, our identities are greater than what this world tells us we are, who this world tells us we are. We're more than the roles that we play, the jobs that we do. We are more than the status that we are given. As Sarah said, we are the disciples, beloved and called, empowered, I would add empowered to that list, to live into another way. We are the ones who are the saints, living into a world and a kingdom beyond our own, living into God's call. And the crosses that we bear, they shape the saints who we are and who we will yet become. If only we will fix our mind on those things above us, on the divine, and not simply on the ways of the world that we see all around us. If only we will live like the risers who are convinced at the core of who they are, that they belong to a kingdom, a world yet unseen, unrevealed. If only we will live fully believing that the day is coming when the dark matter will be sucked away and the light of that new kingdom will be revealed for all the world to see. That is the home, God's kingdom, where our true God-created selves come into full being and live with wholeness and new life. Of course, it's not easy, mind you. The words bear your cross. It's not easy. In the story, the risers, they had it tough. It didn't go well for the risers very often. They were misunderstood. They were mistreated. They were vulnerable in the world around them. It's a lot easier for me to talk about the risers knowing how the story ends and from a distance in an ideal world. But how much harder to be a riser in the midst of that. But as disciples, we are risers in faith. We know that this can be a hard thing, a challenging thing. Sure, there's a lot of things about our world that entice us and a lot of things that are probably been good to us in time. But we are called to a kingdom beyond it. And so that means that those days where it is easier to be right than to do the right thing, those are hard days that they call to us. Just as we are called in the days when it is easier to hold a grudge, to release it in forgiveness, in reconciliation, in the hope of what can yet be. Those days are calling to us to sacrifice our own egos, our own pride, to offer up a servant's heart in the world. The days are calling to us to let go, to open our hands a little more to the wealth that protects us, and to trust the vulnerability of generosity and sharing with one another and carrying each other's burdens together. The days are calling to us. That kingdom, unseen at times, is calling to us to live not according to our own pride, but according to the self-giving love that heals and redeems and restores and shines bright through the dark matter. That's who we are called to be. We are called to see the vision of God's kingdom even through the world we see all around us, in the people we see all around us every day. The challenge, of course, is that sometimes the dark matter is really dark. And so we are called to trust still that that kingdom remains. It's not easy to rise, but I give thanks for the saints who have gone before us, who have showed us that it is possible, who have showed us in their living what that looks like, who have showed us what it is to trust in that kingdom beyond what we can sometimes immediately see, and be formed by that kingdom, and not only by the world around us. It's not easy, this road of discipleship, this rising into the kingdom. But all I can think about is what joy. What joy there is when the dark matter clears and the light of God's kingdom shines forth brightly for all the world to see. What joy when the healing resurrection greets us on the other side of the cross that we bear. What salvation to find ourselves in step with the living God. What a home we will find when that long road of discipleship leads us back to that great river of life. That is what I think of, and I look to the saints. And I remember our call to do the same, to rise believing in the kingdom that is waiting to show forth and break in and envelop this whole world that we live in today. So today, as we hear that call again to take up our cross, to follow Jesus more closely, let us give thanks and let us celebrate the saints who have gone before us, the ones who have lived as risers into their God-given identity even here, the ones who are surely risen, even now in new life. I told you I loved that they were called risers. They rise into that kingdom in this world, and they are risen into that kingdom in their death as they find resurrection life. And we as disciples are called to be and do the same thing. And so may their example lead us on. May it help us to shoulder the cross that we bear. And I don't know what it is for each of us. It's different for each of us. There may be similarities, but we each have a different cross to bear. But may the example before us help us as we go the road ahead of us. And so may we say thanks be to God for that call. Thanks be to God for our identities. Thanks be to God for the saints who have risen before us. Amen. This is where I will call us back to that quarter sheet of paper.